Right now, the breakdown of negotiations in Alaska. Total shock. A bloody provocation by the Russian Federation. The Kremlin blames everything on Kyiv. Oreshnik is being put into play. A strike on the US is possible. On the front, Ukrainian defenders are burning at the borders with Russia. There is panic in the Kremlin. The Ukrainian armed forces are pushing through an incredible strike that shocked everyone. Azov is encircling the occupiers. The breakthrough in Donbas has been stopped. A third of Sumy region has been liberated. Panic in Crimea. Alaska is boiling, Donbas is burning. Putin continues the war, prepares nuclear strikes, and calls for help from the DPRK. Europe has urgently struck back. Shock, the bunker dweller arrived in Alaska with his entire entourage. The one-on-one meeting is cancelled. Trump's threats and intrigue with Zelensky. The world is on the brink. Drones, fires, and panic in Russia. From the victories of the AFU to the circus with bells. How Putin's power is collapsing. Ukraine has broken through into Russian rear areas. Russia has never seen such hell before. The end of the war. 5 possible endings, from a nightmare for Europe to an Afghanistan for Moscow. All this and more in our episode of Hotspot. Shock. The Kremlin is preparing provocations. Kharkiv is under threat. The world is shaking. A blow with a hazel stick. Meeting in Alaska. Putin's secret plan revealed. The bunker dweller wants to scare everyone with nukes and divide the world. What has already happened has shocked everyone. Watch.
But Russia can't just calmly go and sign a peace agreement, can it?
All disappointments in life often come from excessively high expectations.
Well, of course, who would doubt that? That's exactly why the Russian Ministry of Defense has now claimed that Kyiv is supposedly preparing a provocation to disrupt the upcoming talks between the US president and the Kremlin dictator.
To this end, on Monday, August 11th, a group of foreign media journalists was brought to the city of Chuhuiv in the Kharkiv region by SBU vehicles, under the cover story of preparing a series of reports about residents of the city in the frontline zone. Directly before the summit on Friday, the Ukrainian armed forces planned a provocative strike using UAVs and missiles on one of the densely populated residential neighborhoods or a hospital, with a large number of civilian casualties.
You really had to come up with something like that. Here you just can't do without creativity, without initiative, without a proactive approach. Yes, it's already clear that you can't get anywhere without creativity. But still, you would think that a one-on-one meeting with Trump would be a dream for Putin. So why sabotage it while blaming Ukraine in the process?
Again, this is an old Kremlin story, a Soviet story, where they always blamed others for what they themselves were actually doing, often with complete disregard for the truth. So there's nothing new here. All the schemes are completely familiar, completely old. There's one difference. Before, there were 2 systems with different ideologies, but now Putin has no ideology at all, except for trying to intimidate everyone and steal everything, yes.
And we almost believed Lukashenko about Putin's desire for a truce.
Another imaginary truce. I say yes, Russia is interested in this and President Putin as well, but you don't want that.
But here's the main question. How far can that statement actually go? Could Russia really strike at the residents of Kharkiv? Or will it not go beyond mere threats?
I would say that they definitely have no moral or restraining factors at all. As for how far this could go, well, unfortunately, there really are no limits for them. So it could go very far, or it might not go far at all. It really depends on how they decide it should be.
Nevertheless, despite the upcoming meeting with Trump, Putin still manages to scare everyone with his Oreshnik.
We have successfully produced the very first serial Oreshnik system, which is now operational. The first serial missile. Yes. And it has been delivered to the troops.
Of course! What kind of talk about peace would it be without showing off some iron Oreshniks? For Putin, it's almost a tradition now, to remind everyone of his strength before sitting down at the negotiating table. But what does this actually mean? A willingness to compromise, or an attempt to immediately raise the stakes?
Putin isn't ready for anything. He's not prepared to make any concessions. And in fact, this attempted offensive demonstrates exactly that. So the only thing he'll predictably do is try to hide himself behind a large jagged rock and somehow attempt to tell Donald Trump some wildly exaggerated and completely fabricated tall tales, just like they consistently and habitually do in their typical fashion.
But no matter how you look at it, this is an opportunity for Putin. Well, at least that's what he thinks. After all, a meeting with Trump is less about peaceful resolution and more about personal interests.
He wants a kind of repeat of the Yalta format, like how the world was divided after World War II, America. And back then, let me remind you, it was also Great Britain and the Soviet Union. So for him, this meeting with Trump is an attempt to return to a bipolar world. But even if the world does become bipolar, the second pole will be China, not Russia at all. But Putin doesn't want to think about that.
In fact, even Trump himself doesn't really know what to expect from this meeting.
I suppose that the upcoming meeting with President Putin will be a very good and productive one. Well, or maybe not.
Well, at least Trump was honest about it. And just then, a convenient statement about Ukraine came in. But will it actually affect Trump's rhetoric?
Trump is so unpredictable that it's impossible to even to think what's actually going on in his head and what might influence him. The morning weather, whether it's cold or on the contrary, hot in Alaska, the coffee he was served in the morning. Well, I mean, it certainly seems to me that all these various little things might actually significantly affect Trump's overall mood. But most importantly, I would genuinely like to hope that Trump absolutely doesn't want to look like a complete idiot in this particular situation.
The bilateral talks between Trump and Putin will take place on Friday, August 15th in Alaska. But Vladimir Zelensky himself firmly stated that no decisions about Ukraine will be made without Ukraine's own participation.
Shock! The Ukrainian armed forces have reached the border with Russia. Azov is tearing the occupiers apart in Donbas. The Russian breakthrough has been completely crushed. Ukraine's counteroffensive is ruining Russia's plans. A third of the Sumy region has already been liberated. Panic in Crimea. The Muscovites lack both equipment and personnel. The Ukrainian armed forces are acting tough.
Russia has broken through the Ukrainian defense line. The command is reassuring everyone, saying it's just a few sabotage and reconnaissance groups. Western analysts are already speculating about what the loss of the entire Donetsk region would mean. Meanwhile, Ukraine launched a counter-offensive in the Sumy region and recaptured a third of the occupied territories. All the latest frontline news right now. The Russians made a sudden breakthrough at the front ahead of the Putin-Trump meeting. This was reported by the Wall Street Journal. The occupiers found a gap in the Ukrainian defenses and then used their massive manpower reserves to break through. This refers to the salient in the direction of Dobropilya in the Donetsk region.
Now, naturally, Russian troops will try to take advantage of this moment, attempting to consolidate their position, send in additional reinforcements, more troops, and possibly even equipment. And now, probably in the next few days, the Ukrainian armed forces have a chance to somehow contain this breakthrough. There, for example, they could cut off these breakthrough units by liberating the territory at the very base of this breach, or begin attacking from different directions and capture, say, all the villages and settlements along the way, so that there is nowhere for them to hide and so on.
At the same time, military analysts report that the Russian Federation does not control the entire territory that the assault troops managed to pass through. Most likely, during the breakthrough, they were moving in light vehicles, and at this point, it cannot be said that the enemy has managed to gain a foothold and take control of the entire salient.
For now, there are only sabotage and reconnaissance groups present there. These are irregular troops. These particular groups are extremely dangerous because they are highly mobile. They will undoubtedly try to seize various types of vehicles in order to infiltrate further into the area. But it should also not be forgotten that Russian forces constantly use this tactic of small groups to concentrate at certain positions and then advance further.
The Ukrainian command has already responded to the Russian breakthrough. It is reported that the most combat-ready National Guard units, including the Azov Battalion, have been redeployed to reinforce this direction, and those very small assault groups have already felt their presence more than enough.
They wanted to come in as groups but got hit hard. Now we still can't get back out.
Also commenting on the situation, the spokesperson for the Dnipro military group confirmed the Russians' local success, but noted that it was just about a dozen soldiers who managed to slip through the line of contact and were pinned down in fighting wherever they managed to get.
It's not about them taking control of this territory. What actually happened is that a small number of Russians slipped through, between 5 and 10 people. And it's absolutely not how it looks on the map. It's not like they took control of the entire route they traveled. They made their way through and tried to hide in a single basement.
At the same time, experts note that Pokrovsk itself, the city whose encirclement was the main objective and which is located somewhat south of the breakthrough point, has been holding out quite confidently despite constant heavy assaults.
Overall, if it weren't for this very breakthrough near Dobropilya right now, I would say that the situation has somewhat stabilized over the past 2 weeks. That is, the Russian forces had been acting actively up until then, but at Rodinske they really hit a serious obstacle. And for a couple of weeks now there have been heavy battles there, but they haven't been able to advance. So basically, the defense of this particular semicircular salient has been holding quite confidently. I would cautiously say that from the perspective of the Ukrainian armed forces. Of course, these are heavy battles. As I already mentioned, there are a lot of Russian forces there and they are constantly attacking. But nevertheless, we aren't seeing any kind of collapse or crises there.
The situation is also tense north of Pokrovsk. There, the Russians have become active again in the Lyman direction. However, after several days of intensified attacks, apart from dozens of killed assault troops, Russia has gained nothing here.
Right now, we are currently observing a significant and noticeable increase in movement within the specific area of the Serebryansky forest, more precisely the forestry region. Essentially, this ongoing activity represents a clear and deliberate attempt to move further south in the direction of Sloviansk. Will the enemy succeed in this? Will our forces find the necessary reserves? Well, I don't know. In principle, we possess formidable forces that are capable of effectively containing the enemy's relentless advance and preventing further incursions.
Monitoring channels are also reporting Russian activity in Crimea. Equipment is currently being transferred there from the Moscow and Leningrad military districts, with the possibility of further deployment to the Zaporizhzhia direction or near Pokrovsk. However, in recent months for Russia, using armored vehicles in assaults has become a major luxury, so the entire operation might just turn out to be a bluff.
Some of the equipment is more or less available, meaning it can even be moved back and forth just to distract attention. We can't rule out that possibility either. At the moment, yes, the Russian forces haven't set any particularly difficult tasks for the Ukrainian armed forces, specifically on the Zaporizhzhia front in the Zaporizhzhia region. That is, yes, there have been some local attacks there. Maybe they'll try to create some more serious tension, including to force reserves to be redeployed from the Pokrovsk direction, so that there simply aren't enough forces for everything.
But on the Sumy direction, it's the Russians who don't have enough forces. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, in the Sumy region, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to retake a third of all the captured settlements, which is 6 out of 18. In 2 locations, according to Zelensky, the defense forces even reached the border with Russia.
They can't even properly hold on to these territories. It's not the first village already. Some have been cleared, some have been liberated. Yes, 2 settlements have been freed. Fighting is still ongoing for Alexeyevka. So, the Ukrainian military is gradually, of course, within their means. It's clear they don't have a large number of reserves, but nevertheless, they are reducing this bridgehead. It isn't expanding, on the contrary, it's gradually shrinking. All of this is because, for example, during the invasion of the Sumy region, Russian troops are not using heavy equipment, making it much harder for them to defend.
The defense forces are also holding their positions in the Zaporizhzhia region and have advanced 1 kilometer deeper into enemy positions in Luhansk.
A meeting in Alaska under the shadow of apocalypse. Putin is preparing missiles, Lukashenko is working on nuclear scenarios, and North Korea is providing military aid to Russia. The secret plan from the bunker has been revealed. A new phase of the war in Ukraine, nuclear threat from Belarus, and a North Korean landing force of 6,000 troops. All the explosive details are coming up in the report.
Despite agreements for negotiations between the Kremlin dictator Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump, the Russian Federation may be preparing to test a new nuclear-armed cruise missile, according to Reuters.
The test in question concerns the Burevestnik cruise missile. It should be noted that these tests have an extremely low positive effect. Out of the 13 previous and extensive tests conducted, only 2 were partially successful, indicating a significant lack of complete achievement. Therefore, there is absolutely no compelling reason to assert or even suggest that the ongoing testing of this particular cruise missile possesses any discernible element of military pressure or strategic intimidation whatsoever.
Another nuclear weapon, though this time an old and long-forgotten one, will once again be used in the Russia West 2025 exercises. This was announced by Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Kremlin. Kremlin added that nuclear weapons can inflict unacceptable damage on potential adversaries, and also mentioned that during the exercises, Belarus wants to work on planning issues for the use of the Oreshnik complex.
All previous information from the Russian and Belarusian sides about the redeployment of tactical nuclear weapons from the territory of the occupying country to the territory of the Republic of Belarus has not been confirmed. Therefore, this particular message is purely informational in its nature and purpose.
On the night of August 14th, Ukrainian drones launched a massive attack on Russia's Volgograd region. As a result of falling debris, there was a spill and fire involving petroleum products at the Volgograd oil refinery, according to local authorities. Volgograd is home to the Lukoil Volgograd Neftepererabotka oil refinery, which is one of the largest producers of petroleum products in the Southern Federal District. The head of Ukrainian intelligence, Kiriilo Budanov, stated that North Korea plans to send 6,000 troops and about 100 pieces of equipment to Russia, including tanks and armored personnel carriers.
This number of military personnel will be used to address local-level tasks, specifically to counter the Ukrainian defense forces directly on the territory of the Russian Federation in the Kursk region. This is the Sudzhansky district. Therefore, it appears that this information is intended to demonstrate that the Russian Federation has military political allies. Moreover, it shows that Russia has the ability to expand its military presence by deploying North Korean troops on its own territory.
Meanwhile, Britain has refused to send a 30,000-strong contingent of troops to Ukraine.
This decision is primarily driven by political motives. The point is that the United Kingdom is giving the United States the opportunity to exert military political pressure on the Russian leadership in order to put an end to the active hostilities on Ukrainian territory.
Instead, London proposes to patrol our country's airspace with Typhoon and F-35 aircraft, provide training support for Ukrainian troops, assist in demining the Black Sea, and send specialists to help restore the Ukrainian armed forces. The Washington Post reports a threat of encirclement of the Ukrainian army in Pokrovsk. It is also claimed that the Russians have almost completely cut off the city's supply lines.
The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has redeployed some of its most combat-ready units to the Pokrovsk direction. Specifically, this refers to the 1st Azov Corps, which has already contained tactical-level breakthroughs by Russian occupiers in the Pokrovsk area. The Russian Federation has intensified its offensive in the Pokrovsk direction with the aim of threatening to create an operational encirclement.
In this footage, Ukrainian defenders are stopping yet another assault launched by Russian occupiers in the Pokrovsk direction in Donetsk region. During the battle, the soldiers eliminated enemy personnel and struck the enemy's drone positions. The strikes against the invaders were carried out by fighters of the 59th Brigade, named after Yakov Handziuk.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The meeting of the century. Putin arrived to meet Trump with his entourage. All the Tsar's henchmen are present. Lavrov, Ushakov, Belousov, Dmitriev. Shock. Trump is preparing a tough verdict for the Kremlin. Harsh consequences for refusing peace. Meanwhile, Washington is looking for a place to negotiate with Zelensky. Watch all the details right now.
The meeting place cannot be changed. Alaska. What should we expect? All the disappointments, but who would doubt it? But it seems Trump is preparing something special for Putin. Media reports say that in exchange for a ceasefire, Trump may offer Putin access to natural resources in Alaska and a partial lifting of sanctions. Is this really supposed to work?
Some insiders write that supposedly Trump is even ready to include Ukrainian mineral resources in the deal. But as of today, to say that such a scenario could be quite difficult to implement, because the story around Putin today is not about the economy, not about the development of his country, but about military expansion. And the ways to find a solution should fit within this paradigm. What I specifically mean is pressure on Putin.
Nevertheless, Ukraine has nothing to worry about. At least that's what CNN reports. After all, Trump supposedly isn't planning to have any dialogue with Putin about Ukrainian territories. It's only about a ceasefire.
They're talking there about Antarctica and about proposals for joint projects in that context. But overall, once again, the economic component here still seems to be separate. And the political negotiations are separate as well. And can we really say that any progress will be achieved? Specifically within the framework of the visions of both sides, Russian and Ukrainian, in the context of ending this war, it's quite difficult.
And of course, there have to be some scare tactics. Trump promised very harsh consequences for Putin.
Will the war stop after your meeting on Friday? Yes, it will stop. And what will the consequences be? Sanctions, tariffs? I'm not obliged to say. The consequences will be very serious, yes.
But it sounded somewhat uncertain. Trump is trying to scare Putin. Or maybe he himself still doesn't know what to do.
Right now, many analysts and diplomats agree that there will be an attempt. There is an air of truce, but how effective will it be? In the context of stopping the entire war, as of today, it's quite unclear. Plus, there is talk of a possible 15-day ceasefire in order to prepare for a meeting between Zelensky and the Kremlin dictator. But again, how interested is Putin himself in stopping the fighting for 15 days, since all Kremlin propaganda around the peace process is built on completely different narratives?
But what is not surprising is that Putin dreams of meeting with Trump. But not because he wants to be friends with him, but because he believes that a meeting in Alaska would make Russia a world power equal to the US. And the Kremlin dictator himself as an equal to Trump.
Obviously, Kremlin propaganda and the dictator himself, Putin will personally present this as a major breakthrough and significant progress.
Putin is almost hoping to repeat the Yalta Conference of 1945, where the US, the UK, and the Soviet Union shaped the world during World War II. Now, the Kremlin dictator thinks that only thanks to him and Trump, they will stop a third world war.
Putin lives in a fictional world and in constructs that have long been incompatible with him. Putin dreams and fantasizes about being Stalin, Peter the Great, and perhaps even Catherine the Great. But today's geopolitical landscape shows him solely as a proxy for China.
Whatever that truly means, Donald Trump has already announced the next significant meeting, which, in his considered opinion, should be much more progressive and forward-thinking.
There is a very high probability that we will have a second meeting which will be more productive than the first, because in the first one I will simply find out where we stand and what we are doing. And I'll say it again, this is Biden's war, not my war. He's the one who dragged us into this.
Thus, the media reports that we are now talking about a trilateral meeting between Trump, Zelensky, and Putin, which could take place as early as the end of next week.
Urgent. The Ukrainian armed forces are breaking through into Russia's rear. Factories are burning. The front is cracking. Putin is in a panic, and Ukrainian drones are turning Russia into ashes. Shock, Russia's new secret defense, bell-ringing Russian style, and how they're trying to stop Ukrainian drone attacks in the swamps. These shots are blowing up the internet.
At around 3 in the morning on August 12th, Ukrainian drones struck the monocrystal chemical plant in Stavropol, Russia. Local residents heard 5 explosions, after which a fire broke out at the facility. City authorities claimed that the UAVs were suppressed by electronic warfare and the attack was repelled. However, the bright plumes of smoke tell a completely different story. The chemical plant is a key producer of synthetic crystals, which are used, among other things, in the manufacture of weapons for the occupying army. In Yaroslavl, Russia, a paint and varnish factory caught fire during the night. The fire engulfed 4,500 square meters, causing the building's roof to collapse. The fire was assigned an elevated 3rd level of difficulty. The enterprise produces paint and varnish materials, including special coatings for military equipment. Bloomberg reports on successful strikes against Russia's strategic facilities, as a result of which they cease operations. Thus, the Russian oil refinery in Saratov, owned by Powerosneft, stopped receiving oil after a drone attack on Sunday, August 10th. Meanwhile, the situation on the Russian-Ukrainian war front remains dynamic. The Demstate Analytical Center reports that in recent days, Russian forces have intensified their advance toward Dobropilya. In particular, they are trying to gain a foothold near the Dobropilya-Kramatorsk highway.
As of today, Our European partners and the United States of America have made a good delivery to us this month of long-range artillery, high-precision munitions, and long-range missiles. Therefore, we are holding steady in active defense.
On the opposite side of the front, the AFU are advancing. The Ukrainians have liberated 2 villages in the Sumy region, Stepne and Novokonstantinovka.
The course direction in the Sumy sector. Our groups, small tactical groups, conducted effective reconnaissance by combat, captured some enemy strong points. They took a small number of prisoners and secured them. Now they are holding precisely the same strategic position and have successfully moved forward a significant bit, effectively wedging themselves deeply into the enemy's formidable defensive line and thereby pushing the entire front line slightly further ahead.
It seems the fewer successes Putin has at the front, the greater his appetites become. The first Russian units have arrived in Belarus to take part in joint exercises, the active phase of which is scheduled for September. We're talking about several hundred Russian servicemen and a couple dozen pieces of equipment.
They will now redeploy their forces, conduct extensive and large-scale military exercises with a significant entry into the sovereign territory of the former Baltic states. This will involve the seizure, consolidation of control, and the potential drawing of the entire European continent into a broader conflict. Negotiations about how things should appear to be. Well, for now, it seems that we have reached a temporary stopping point in our discussion, and further details will be provided at a later time.
While Putin Napoleonovich is conquering more and more territories in his own mind, Russian women have decided to fend off drones with bells, foil, and cardboard. They called this innovation Okov 25. It's a simple device designed to create a directed sound and noise capable of interfering with the operation of unmanned aerial vehicles. The inspiration for this miracle came from the Russian church, or more precisely, its clergy, who claim that the sound of church bells is better than drones.
Shocking! 5 scenarios for the end of the war. Experts warn of catastrophe. For Russia, it will be worse than Afghanistan. The West is preparing a deadly scenario. Putin is going all in. A ceasefire is not part of his plans. Mid-autumn time X. Experts have named the most likely outcome of the war. Watch all the explosive details right now.
A nightmare for Europe and Afghanistan for Moscow, a freeze and territorial losses for Kyiv. Against the backdrop of progress in negotiations within the Ukraine-USA-Russia triangle, American media have predicted several possible scenarios for how events might unfold.
5 possible outcomes for the end of the Russia-Ukraine war.
The Kremlin's goal in negotiations with Trump, delaying tactics both regarding sanctions and military aid to Ukraine, as well as establishing personal contacts between Putin and the US president. The last thing Moscow is interested in right now in such negotiations and meetings is a ceasefire and an end to hostilities.
We can see that Putin backed down. Putin realized, apparently economists explained to him, what it would mean essentially to lose the main source of income for the military budget. And what this means is most likely a complete economic collapse in the medium term. That's precisely why Vladimir Putin is now actively trying, let's say, to skillfully play many different cards at once, deliberately and strategically shuffling the complex card of the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war into the entire political deck.
The least likely scenario, as rightly noted by American media, is Putin agreeing to an unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine.
Ukraine has expressed its readiness to accept the U.S. proposal for the immediate implementation of a temporary 30-day ceasefire, which can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties if adopted and simultaneously observed by the Russian Federation.
The Russian dictator, at least since March, has refused the 30-day ceasefire proposed by the White House, using various false pretexts and formulations.
My conversations with Putin are always very pleasant, very lively discussions. And then that very night, missiles are launched. I come home and say, First Lady, you know, I spoke with Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. And she's like, oh yeah, they just struck another city.
Following Putin's predictable refusal to cease hostilities, experts are discussing 2 diametrically opposed scenarios. The first is a nightmare for Europe. This scenario will occur if Putin does go ahead, Trump and the US abandon Ukraine, leaving it one-on-one with Russia.
European leaders do not have a political mandate to enter the war inside Ukraine. Putin advances. NATO cannot provide a unified response. This is a nightmare for Europe and the end of a sovereign Ukraine.
At this crossroads, the balance of power depends entirely on Belousov's position at home. After all, if military support for Ukraine continues, along with new significant sanctions against Russia and its allies, a catastrophe is predicted for Putin. The war with Ukraine will end much worse for Moscow than Afghanistan.
The motherland is proud of you. The motherland thanks you. The motherland counts on you.
That was the last night our soldiers spent on Afghan soil.
Massive Russian losses at the front, a shortage of petrodollars, declining revenues and spending on armaments, and a deepening economic crisis within the country. Kremlin geostrategists have already experienced something similar on the eve of the collapse of the USSR.
The Kremlin may face a moment when its resistance to the ordinary and minor inconveniences of reality, as well as to the economic hardships of its own people, becomes fatal for itself. A similar short-sighted political calculation ultimately led to the fruitless occupation of Afghanistan by the Soviets.
The most likely scenario, according to the media and experts, is the continuation of negotiations accompanied by ongoing hostilities, at least until mid-autumn. The US will continue its current course, putting pressure on Moscow and supporting Kyiv. And for now, Putin is satisfied with the current arithmetic. The lives of tens of thousands of Russians in exchange for minimal advances across scorched Ukrainian land.
They will keep fighting the Russians as long as they have the opportunity until the rainy season begins. But that is in fact the end of October, the beginning of November, depending on the weather. And then they will move on to political agreements along the line of demarcation. I genuinely believe that they will ultimately compromise on their previously stated and significant demands regarding the 5 specific regions. At the same time, and until that particular point in time, they will undoubtedly make every conceivable and possible effort right now to achieve the absolute maximum on the battlefield, securing a decisive advantage.
At the same time, no progress toward achieving peace is possible without the further participation of Ukraine and Europe in the negotiations. Putin's dream is a private deal with Trump, as a result of which the war will continue and Washington will turn its back on the European continent.
That's all. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.